All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us at our Lunch and Learn today for June. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT, and I am joined today with Sil Caggiano, and we're going to be talking about emergency response. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background about Sil, he has had 39 years of in-depth experience with emergency response as well as planning and mitigation in the EMS, fire, and hazardous materials fields, extensive team leadership, operations, and management experience with the department that has over 20 members spread across 3 turns that handled approximately 3,000 emergency calls for service. He has considerable experience with creating and implementing local and state and national emergency response plans, as well as building and managing response assets. Experience giving testimony before local, state, and federal legislators and courts on safety issues. So, with all that to say, is really Sil is here, and we're going to talk about emergency response. And we feel like we have a really amazing expert here to really talk about emergency response, particularly as it pertains to unconventional gas development, as it commences in our communities, and some of the kind of underlying things that we as individuals and residents don't really think about when thinking about this type of activity coming to our town for the first time. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sil, and bringing your expertise to this discussion.
Oh, thank you for the invite, Jillian.
Yeah, so if we go to the next screen, so Sil, can you tell me a little bit about we were going to start a conversation with what Sarah Title III is and why it's important and some of your experiences there.
Well, SARA Title III was the reauthorization act of an earlier act that went after started to establish super funds when all the chemical problems started to arise post Love Canal. Um, it really grew out of the Bhopal, India situation, and the legislatures here in the United States looked at industry and said, "Hey, this isn't going to happen here, right?" And industry, of course, looked at the state legislature and said, "Oh, no, that's not going to happen here." Unfortunately, in Institute, West Virginia, a few months later, it happened. And the legislators acted quick and started SARA Title III, which is affectionately known by all of us as the chemical right to know. And basically, what that did is it set up your local emergency planning committees and your state emergency planning committees. It established that businesses will now have tier 2 reporting, which means they will bring their chemical inventories, put them on paper, and this will be submitted to the municipalities that they're in. Like in Youngstown, we have a whole bunch of them that will report to not only us but to the emergency management. So your emergency management will have that information. It also set up hazmat teams. The local emergency planning committees were tasked with the duty of establishing how they were going to handle these emergencies. Hazmat teams jump straight up, right in the front. And I've had the fortune or misfortune, however you want to look at it, of seeing this as it's developed since I got on the department in 1982 to when I retired a few years ago. I've seen the development, the morphing, what was done, what has failed to been done. But SARA Title III gives the public the tools necessary to go after legislatures and businesses that are not giving them the information that they need. And we'll discuss that later on another incident where that actually occurred.
Yeah, and I guess, to me, it would be important for any resident living near a shale gas development or any kind of chemical plant or anything to really know what is at the plant. Am I kind of getting the gist of why this exists and not just for residents, but first responders, many times first responders are our community members, they're volunteer fire departments, so they need to know this as well. Can you kind of give me an example of like maybe when when you didn't know what was at a plant that you responded to, and what some of the results of that were, and why that's so important to now like know all of these things that not only for first responders but for residents.
Well, my first initiation, it's the one I love to use as an example all the time. I had just gotten on the department. My civil service papers ink was still dry on the paper, and it was still wet on the paper. And I got a call when I was working on the ambulance to go to a wastewater treatment plant. Now this is like 1982. This predates all of SARA Title III and all of chemical right to know. So my partner and I pulled up, and there was this orangish cloud rolling up one of the hills. We're like, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. What the heck's that? Oh, that's chlorine. Oh, okay. You said there's people that are exposed to it. Yeah, there's these three guys. Take them to the hospital. A couple of them are having breathing problems. So, that was it. That was all the information that you got. There was no, any way of looking up material safety data sheets that they're now called safety data sheets. There was none of that. So we just loaded three people into the ambulance. The two worst I put in the back with me. Fortunately for me, I turned on a vent fan that was a little bit ahead of me, and that sucked out all the chlorine that they were still off vaporing. We had no idea that occurred. Unfortunately, my partner put the other guy up front with him, and because it was summer, he was recirculating the air conditioning in the front. Long story short, we dropped these patients off at the hospital. They all ended up in the hospital for a few days, as did my partner, because he started to have problems with his blood gases and all that stuff from the exposure to the chlorine. I fortunately got away with just a sore throat because I, thank God, put my vent fan on and I didn't get exposed to as much. But this is the kind of stuff that typically happened over and over and over again. And, listening to the stories of all the old firefighters, all the places that they've been, Youngstown was a huge steel company, so they had the steel mills. Those steel mills are putting out, as we know now, all the benzenes, toluenes, ethyl benzenes. They're all there, and these guys would go fight fires at these places. They're all exposed to that stuff, and they never really knew about it. So this was the history in the making. And as things developed, as I got older and they started to put stuff out there, we started forming hazmat teams. I realized, yeah, I got exposed to that stuff. Yeah, getting on the hazmat team might be a good career move for me, so I don't kill myself. So
Yeah.
that was what led me in that direction in my career.
Nice, nice. Yeah. So it sounds like you had the forethought to make sure that you knew about this, and that this Sarah Title III really tells people what are at these facilities. Is can you tell me a little bit about like when a disaster happens? Let's take East Palestine for instance. That was something that recently happened that people really have a good idea of. It was in the news recently. Tell me a little bit about kind of you get the call, right, as a firefighter or first responder. You get the call that this kind of thing happens. What are some of the first things or first questions that you ask when you hear about something like East Palestine and the train derailment?
Well, how I got involved was I was retired at the time, and I seen the text on my phone about emergency responding and all that other stuff, and I'm like, well, yeah, I picked a good time to retire. But I got the call at 10 o'clock the next morning from actually local media, and their questions were, "Hey, Sil, what's this stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you talking about?" And they're sending me pictures of these cars. And I says, "When did this occur?" Like 9 o'clock. They haven't told you what's leaking. I said that's part of what SARA Title III is supposed to. Chemical emergency. You're supposed to let the public know, and the easiest way to let the public know is by letting the media know. Hey, media, this is what we've got. Get this out to all the people. We want them to start evacuating. We're gonna be doing this at 10 o'clock that morning. The media had no idea, and they said they weren't being told. So I used a program that I carry on what I call my work screen of my phone, and I started running the alphanumeric numbers of the train cars, and I started identifying product. And I said, the best way for you to use this is the next press conference they have, tell them, we have found out from another source what these chemicals are. Why have you not told us? That isn't that guaranteed under SARA Title III. So the next meeting after that, then all of a sudden the people there realized that the gig was up, and they started coming forth. Now, after the fact, I learned of some curious things that occurred all during that particular thing. They actually had the county hazmat team that I knew. The hazmat team leader, I helped him build his hazmat team. Um, Norfolk Southern and got um, actually relieved at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Told him to go home. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like a smart move, except for the fact that Norfolk Southern had their hazmat people on scene, and that set the wheels in motion for what everyone saw. But the big thing there is they were not giving the people. My whole thing is, as soon as I got the manifest for the train, which we found out after the fact they had by 10:30 that night, I'd be immediately telling news me here, this is what's out there. Tell the people what's going on.
Right.
Get these people out, because they had some serious chemicals. Aside from the one that everyone, the vinyl chlorides that everyone focuses on, they had some very bad stuff there. Everything from benzene to uh, ethyl methyl stuff, bad stuff, and they should have been more proactive. That we could have a day long discussion of what went on and all the failures there.
Yeah.
But that's one of the cases where SARA Title III was not implemented, and people were kept in the dark way too long. Evacuations didn't start until sometime that evening, and
Yeah.
then they were looking at evacuation in place. They were looking at maybe 1 mile. I said, no, you're going to have to, or half mile, excuse me. I said, you're going to have to be at least a mile away. And I
Yeah.
said, and some of these products that are being burned up, you're creating hydrogen cyanides. You're creating all kind of different chemicals that are not good for people to breathe. And in fact, a lot of the news media people that were talking to me, they expressed the fact that their noses are burning, their throats are burning, they're coughing, they're having wheezing. And I said, get the hell out of there.
Yeah. 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 It's crazy. So it sounds like, you know, that it's really important to plan for these types of incidents, right? Because when it comes down to it, the media, the people on the ground, they all get funneled this information. There's an information channel, right? That people get funneled into to help protect themselves. And I think it's a little bit different with a train, right? Because anywhere along that train track that could happen. It really doesn't matter. But when you're talking about stationary facilities, I would think it would be a little bit easier, when a stationary facility has specific things on site. But again, sometimes you look at, emergency response plans, or as they call them, ERPs, and you find that they're inadequate. And if we go actually to the next slide, this is actually one of the ERP plans for a well pad, actually less than a half mile from my house. So if there is an incident at this pad, I will be evacuated with over 1,000 of my neighbors. And this well pad is in a very densely populated area. There are 3,000 people that are within a mile, which is not like you're talking about in some of the rural communities that you probably have experienced so far. There was there is a video from one of the helicopters in Ohio where one of the big incidents happened, and I remember them saying that around that incident there were 30 people that were evacuated within that mile radius. 30 people is a much different task than 3,000 people. So I would think, with that, it would be important to make sure that your emergency response plan is adequate. And so, can you tell me a little bit about your experiences with these emergency response plans that are available, or that should be made. What are some of the problems that you see exist with these ERP plans that are put out by the oil and gas industry?
Well, to back up a little bit, your SARA Title III gives first responders the tools to pre-plan for this stuff. Fire departments and emergency responders live under the umbrella of pre-planning. You want to pre-plan everything. There's an old saying in the fire service: we pre-plan going to the bathroom, we pre-plan what we're going to have for lunch, we pre-plan all this stuff because it's important to pre-plan. SARA Title III gives you those tools. Just like in East Palestine, what we noticed was extreme lack of utilizing resources to pre-plan for something that is in your backyard, literally behind the fire station. In Youngstown, we had three major lines that run through the city of Youngstown. Every year, if not that, every other year, I was training my guys on how to identify the tracks, how to get a hold of people, where to get the manifest from, what to do, who to call. This never occurred there. And it's the same with these ERPs that are coming from the oil and gas industry. However, we have to add in the mystery of all of this. Oil and gas managed to have enough politicians give them the exemption. They give them the exemption for disclosure. They give them the exemption for poisoning your lands, your water. Everybody on this earth should be guaranteed safe air, safe water, and a safe place to live. Along comes the oil and gas industry and says, "Oh no, no, no! Getting oil and gas supersedes all of your rights. We don't have to abide by SARA Title III. We can keep this stuff all secret." And the invention the intentions with the oil and gas in the state of Ohio was what first made me jump down this rabbit hole of the oil and gas industry. My chief looked over the proposed legislation that came from the ALEC group, and he said, "Hey, read this over and tell me what you think's wrong with it." And after I digested, I said, "There is no SARA Title III reporting. There is no two-tier reporting. We don't know what's going on there." And that's when I said, that can't be. That's not going to keep my guys safe. And if I
Right.
can't keep my guys safe, I can't keep you safe. I'm
Right.
not going to go take 120 firemen out of the Youngstown Fire Department and throw them willy-nilly at something without knowing what the heck we're getting into, without that pre-plan that I was
Mhm.
talking about. That's disastrous. And when you start looking, the oil and gas industry likes, oh yeah, we've planned for all these emergencies. But when you look at their emergency response plans or ERPs, most of them are just rather cookie cutter.
Mhm.
And I call them paper tigers because all they do is they check boxes.
Yeah.
Do we have adequate fire protection? Yes. We've got a fire station that's 5 miles away. Okay, 5 miles away. Volunteer fire service. So if you have a problem in the middle of the night, odds are you're not going to get a fire truck there for probably 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Doubles in its size every 30 to 45 seconds. Oh, we've got that handled. We have fire extinguishers on site. Nice. If you look at what happened at the first slide, that big column of black smoke started off as a fire on one of the machines. Now, obviously, the fire extinguishers that they had didn't work. So, now you're going to wait 15, 20 minutes for the first due engine company to, come and put your fire out. Man, you're going to be in a world of hurt if that's what's going on. And they
Right.
just check the box. Yes, fire service taken care of. The other thing they don't do is they don't talk to the fire service. Again, to the pre-plan. How do I know what you have if you don't tell me? And that was the problem with the Statoil fire that you showed in the first picture. When the fire service came up, they said, "Yeah, we don't have anything to tell you what we've got. It burned up in the truck, if it was ever in the truck in the first place. We'll get you the information."
Mhm.
Well, it took them 3 days to get them safety data sheets of what chemicals they were being exposed to. I'm not going to throw my firefighters in there. I'm going to
Right.
back out there, evacuate everybody, and and we'll deal with it from there. And I don't understand what the upstream industry, the oil and gas industry, is trying to do here. Because if they worked with the fire service and we knew it was there, we could pre-plan for it and we could mitigate a lot of the destruction that occurs when they're just throwing their hands up in the air and doing nothing. They do we have it? Do we have the ability to boom and pad? Yes. I've never seen booms and pads at any wellhead that I was ever at.
Wow.
Please show me and show me the adequate amount because trust me, on a hazmat team, I know I don't have enough.
Right.
We we have response companies. I was trained by one of their response companies. Their response time could be anywhere between 8 and 48 hours. So you waiting that long? And the Powhatan example that you were talking about, where there was blowing, gas up into the air, mitigators weren't there for 3 days.
Yeah.
That that Powhatan uh, leak was the largest release of methane in the United States to date,
Yeah.
and it occurred right there in the state of right here in the state of Ohio along the PA border. The plume was tracked all the way into Pennsylvania, into Pittsburgh from that release.
Yeah.
They ended up evacuating 2.5 miles out. And this was in a rural area where you only had like 30 people. But, they should, well, we're going to evacuate, half mile, or we're going to evacuate 1,600 feet. Well, this was a blowout. There was no fire, just a blowout. It was
Mm-hmm.
releasing product. And they
Right.
still had to evacuate 2.5 miles. So their pre-plans that they put out aren't adequate. They're inadequate for the worst disaster. When we pre-plan something, especially with hazmat, we would throw it up on the board and we would say, how bad can bad get? And we would pre-plan around bad.
Yeah.
How many people is this going to involve? We released 100% of the product in a 5-minute period. How bad is bad? And that's how we would trade. And as long as it didn't get that bad, we could condense and understand what was going on.
Yeah.
These
Yeah. And I,
these just don't let you do that.
right, right. And so I think that some takeaways that I heard, and I just want to confirm for the audience, right? So number one, you said the fire doubles in size, and so that I think is important. So time is of the essence, and two, that the oil and gas industry contracts out people to respond to the stuff on the pad. And those people sometimes are in Texas. Those people sometimes have to take a plane in or drive hours in. Meanwhile, this incident is getting bigger and bigger as it goes on. And so the fire department, the local fire departments, their jobs are to evacuate people and try to protect themselves and the property and the people that live around the site. But I've heard so many times, well, we don't go on the pad. It's we can't go on the pad. But at the very least, they need to know what's on the pad, because if they don't know what's on the pad and where it's located, how will they know what chemicals people are going to be exposed to? And based on where the fire is or where the incident's happening, what chemicals are closest to that center of the incident, right? Because if you have, let's say you have a diesel tank, for instance, that is located on a pad, and you have a fire and the fire is spreading, as as soon enough, it's going to get to the diesel tank, if it's in close proximity. So these are really important things that should be included in these ERP plans. And I don't know if I've ever seen an ERP plan with any of that information on it. And they're required to actually give it to DEP, and they're required to have it on site for anybody to look at. And I don't think that they're doing enough, and I don't think the DEP, it's different there in Ohio. You guys have a DEP as well, but our DEP, I know that they don't even look at this before they permit the pad to see if on paper, because it's one thing to have a plan, right? It's another thing to make sure that that plan is in reality executable. It's like you said, they're checking off boxes. And well, when you're checking off boxes, yeah, sure, you're developing a plan, but is the plan going to in reality work? and this is the question that I often have when looking at these ERP plans, and I don't know if I've ever seen one that I was like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. This makes like, this looks like it would work. Um, and we do have a question from somebody in the audience. So I don't know still if you can see the question on the screen here, but yeah, if you have any response to what I just said, and then I can ask the question, or if you can see it on the screen, we can talk about this really quick.
Well, I think the question here is what can someone within the chemical industry do to help first responders and the public in the event of a disaster?
Yeah.
Um, my advice would be to get a hold of somebody, call the dispatchers and say, hey, look, I have some expertise in this. Let me get a hold of the incident commander. However, in the East Palestine issue, Oxyvinyl had an expert on scene. They had a chemical expert on scene, a person that was in charge of Oxyvinyl's production and shipping. And um, Norfolk Southern put the guy in the room and shut the door and didn't let anybody know he was there. So the whole thing in a nutshell is you've got to be vocal. You've got to make sure that these people, get to the right places. Is what good was Oxyvinyl's chemical expert? Their chief engineer, sitting in a room and not being involved in the decision process. I know why he wasn't involved in the decision process. I called that as soon as I started to see the mess that was being, passed off as proper emergency response.
Hmm.
But some of the games they play, and the oil and gas industry is no different. They'll give you sometimes an MSDS sheet or SDS sheets as they're called now, and then you read them and it's like, okay, it says 65% of this product is water. All
Hmm.
right, what's the rest of it? Oh, we can't tell you that. Ah, there we go. So you really didn't give me a message, did you? You gave me a bullcrap.
Yeah.
Or they'll put these cutesy names on something, Gas Perm 1000. Well, what's this? Well, we don't know because it's a tertiary product, and we never got an SDS sheet because they're involved in the oil and gas industry. They play these little shell games. They'll bring Halliburton in to frack the well. Well, Halliburton has their proprietary chemicals too.
Hmm.
So when you go to the well site and you say, "Hey, look, what's the safety data sheet on this?" Well, we don't know. It was a third party that came in. They didn't bring any SDS sheets. We'll have to get that to you. Well, when the stuff is spewing into the air and onto the ground, hey, I'll get back to you, or the boys are working on it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And these plans that they put out, they're just paper tigers. They're there to check the boxes. How we, for some reason, they decided to put the Ohio Department of Natural Resources in charge of our oil and gas industry. Those people do stuff without even public hearings sometimes.
Yeah.
They totally check the boxes. So, okay, yeah, they put this in, they put this in. Granted, they don't physically go and say, are you going to do what you say you can do? Do you have the capability of doing this? In the fire service, we have to prove that we have that stuff. We're rated every 4 or 5 years. Do you
Yeah.
have that? Do you have this? Yes. Show us. In the hazmat world, I sat on the state technical advisory committee. We approved and checked hazmat teams. We would physically go to sites and say, show me this, show me that, let me see it. That doesn't occur. And as far as our Environmental Protection Agency, keep in mind that the Ohio EPA was on scene when Norfolk Southern was burying contaminated dirt under the railroad.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
So that
and,
tells
and,
you their effectiveness right
and
there.
from the testimony that I heard and I was involved in, with the grand jury involved with the fracking, your PADEP isn't much better.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, PADEP, we had asked for, and this at the site that's up on the screen, we had said, hey, this is a big, this area is highly populated. This is not like traditional rural setting that we're used to seeing well pads here in the state of Pennsylvania. We want a public hearing. DEP said, they said no. they said, no, we don't have to give a public hearing, so we're not going to give a public hearing. There was a local public hearing, but actually, this well pad was one of the well pads that started this organization 10 years ago. So this well pad was proposed 10 years ago. It's still not built, thank goodness, because we are fighting back tooth and nail to try to try to let the DEP know that this is not proper to have this type of situation for this well pad. But we just, in the meantime, we try to just voice our opinions and we're ignored. And it's really terrible. And someone else has a comment up on the screen that Ohio is opening up their beloved parks and public spaces to drilling. Yeah, and it is heartbreaking to see that is happening in Ohio, and it's happening elsewhere too. And people need to stop and take a beat and think about it. Think about what chemicals, particularly in a forested area. I mean, this well pad is, I don't know if you can see the picture really well enough, but they actually have to clear a tremendous amount of trees around the pad. This is all forested area. And I live right over the other side of the hill of that forest, and I can tell you that forest is a noise dampening. It is a source of helping with stormwater runoff. They actually did some logging up there several years ago, and now we have more stormwater runoff than we ever have before in my development. And it's just very interesting to see that all these things are oil and gas industry is coming in and really turning our neighborhoods for forever, turning them into different places forever, turning our parks into different places forever. We can't ever go back later and say, you know what, we don't want this gigantic well pad here, because the facility needs to exist to make sure that the area is not contaminated further. And we have another comment up on the screen. As a chemist, I think it is often underestimated, and I'm not sure that is deliberately it's a deliberate choice by industry or just a lack of a procedure and tendency to avoid the magnitude of the problem. Yeah, I think that what you were talking about earlier, still with the proprietary nature of the chemicals, I think that the workers that are on the scene, the workers that are on the well pad, sometimes don't even know what these chemicals are because
They,
of the
they,
proprietary nature.
they don't understand it. And if you really want to get to the heart of it, I suggest everyone go out and buy Justin Noble's book, Petroleum 238. He talks about it. I knew that this was going on because these people just would talk too lackadaisical about, well, yeah, a little radium don't hurt anybody. Well, you go talk to the Radium Now girls about that. They're all dead. They all died from horrific cancers due to radium. And that they're not doing what's supposed to be done. The problem that we're running into with the shale play industry is these wells are only going to last about 7 years. This isn't your grandfather's well that sat out in the middle of his farm and produced for 15 years or 20
Mm-hmm.
years, 30, some of them even longer. These are multi-fracked wells, some of them extending miles
Mm-hmm.
underground, some of them on two tiers. Sometimes they'll come down, they'll hit the Marcellus, then they'll come back up and hit the Utica, all in the same, well. So these things probably produce about 7 years tops. So they got to start moving closer and closer and closer into cities and towns to get into areas that they haven't tapped out. And you've
Mm-hmm.
also got to realize, as Dr. Ted Ock, proved, for every unit of energy you pull out, you create 10 units of waste. So now that stuff's got to go put somewhere, and most of this stuff is ending up in our landfills or injection wells, or wherever else they want to dump it. So you've got to, every well is a huge multi-million gallon waste producer.
Yeah.
Do you want these things? Do you want these trucks running through your neighborhoods? Do you
Yeah.
want this happening in your neighborhoods? And you're correct. They clear cut everything to put these wells in. So what does that disrupt? Well, the deer that used to be in that forest that they've clear cut now are going to be in your backyards. I mean, everyone likes deer, but still, you're disturbing habitats. Uh, Dr. Pododnik did a study where clear cutting to allow pipelines to go through disrupted, nesting patterns of, indigenous birds. What are we doing here? Is this worth it?
Yeah.
And to lie to the public about what chemicals, and the reason why they're lying is because if they told you that they're putting PFAS down their tubes, they told you they're putting corrosives, if they told you they're putting biocides, if they told you they're putting all kind of other chemicals, and if they told you what the hell came back up out of the hole, you would say, "Get the hell out of here! I don't want you in my neighborhood."
That's right. That's right. I don't care how much money you're going to give us. We're not going to let you do this. So,
Trust me, as a hazmat guy, when I started to find out what was going down and coming up, I just like I said, "You got to be effing kidding me." They're so lackadaisical about this stuff. This is bad stuff.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I just want to mention I put two links in the chat. The first link that I put in the chat is the link that's actually on this slide, the comments and proposed changes to the 2023 updated PEMA. So that's the state hazard mitigation plan. Protect BT in conjunction with a couple other uh, mem- local residents, we actually made comments to this in 2023, and there were lots of things that were not included in the state plan. I think it was like 25 pages of comments that we made it of things that were not included. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also, Sil brought up Justin Noble's book, which is amazing. If you have not read it, I also put the link in the chat for you can actually go on our website and get it from our just directly from our website, because we had an event with Justin not too long ago and we purchased a bunch of those books. So we still have some. You can go ahead and purchase it online if you'd like. And also, we have some other stuff there. I do have a question from Barbara on the screen. Are emergency responders prepared to rescue people from ruptured pipelines carrying carbon dioxide? How many rescuers have access to electric vehicles? That was Barbara's question. So, do you think you could answer that question?
Carbon dioxide, that's kind of a little simpler. If it's just pure carbon dioxide, you can, there's ways of rescuing. We've most of us in the fire service have trained to rescue in what's called low oxygen environments, confined space, oxygen displaced environments. As far as access to electric vehicles, um, the United States is lagging way behind the rest of the world. I don't know of any electric fire trucks. When I was in Italy a couple of years ago, I seen a ton of electric fire trucks, electric ambulances, electric, street sweepers, electric garbage trucks. So we're lagging way behind. And one of the reasons why is because the oil and gas industry takes all their profit and they put it into negative advertising on renewable energy sources. They don't want you off, off their hook. They want you on their hook until they don't have a hook anymore, or we're all dead from the stuff that they've done to make their millions. Mind you, they don't live in our communities. They live elsewhere where they don't allow the fracking. And when they want to get out, they go on their boats in Club Med, and they laugh about how much money they made off of the Rust Belt areas of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and some of the other areas where they frack. Um, so it's a sad situation there.
Yeah, for sure. We have another question in the chat. I wonder how many of those problems are exacerbated by understaffed and underfunded environmental health and safety departments within industry. I think that's a good question, but I would also pose the question of how many of these are how many problems are exacerbated by understaffed and underfunded departments within the state. So the state funding, with
It's
you know first
it's not
responders, with
it's not
DEP. Go ahead.
it's not just the funding; it's um, the political levers that are
Yeah,
being played.
yeah,
Um, when you have a legislature that is very pro fracking, To tell you a story, we were talking about the radium that's being spread on the roads with the brine for de-icing and for wetting down the roads to keep the dust down. And we're basically telling an Ohio senator that, look, this stuff contains radium 226, 228. It's bad for kids. Kids inhale this stuff.
Mhm.
Their cellular reproduction is on steroids. This is dangerous. They could end up with all kind of cancers down the road. And he looked at us and he just basically says, well, oil and gas are national security. Energy is national security. And that was his answer to it. It's not like, oh, wow, that's terrible. Kids might die. Kids might be getting exposed to this and end up with something. It's like, well, national security. So I guess it's with some of these politicians, it's okay that we're sacrificing our kids to the altar of the oil and gas gods.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset that you get in. And these are the same mindsets that are controlling the levers of funding for volunteer fire services, for full-time fire services, for the EPA. The EPA works totally under the auspices. And in Ohio, we have seen where the legislature has actually reached in and controlled what has went on in these places. The health department, the EPA, the health department of the RAD departments. They've went anything that could mess with the oil and gas gods. They have destabilized, defunded, or taken and totally made useless. And that occurs not just in Ohio. You have legislatures in Pennsylvania that are trying the same thing, and it goes on elsewhere.
Yep. Yeah. And actually, I just put in the chat for folks to check out our staff member Tom Pike's testimony. A couple weeks ago, actually, he went to the state to testify on that very issue, still on road spreading. And I listened to some of the folks there, and it's like, well, we need it for dust, and dust is going to cause health problems, but you could just use water. And it wouldn't cause the problems that radioactive fracking waste spread on the roads would cause. Like, yes, suppress the dust, suppress it with water, please, because spreading radioactive material just to give the oil and gas industry a way to cheaply get rid of their waste, to me that is just bonkers. And I don't understand the logic there at all. And so we have lots of questions in the chat and comments in the chat. So thank you everybody for participating and asking your questions. We're actually going to get to the next question here. What methods of notifying people of an emergency has a chief had experience with? And are there siren phone messages? What have you seen? What are some effective ways to notify people in these incidences?
Well, you want to use them all. You can do crawls. Your EMA director has the ability to order all your medias to do crawls. You can do the where you heard your phones beeping and they'll send you a message. You can download some apps that'll get you emergency response messages. I think FEMA has quite a few. Um, Sirens, of course, but those, I don't know, those seem to be fading away now that we have our cell phones. But still, uh, again, radio, TV, emergency response channels. I've used them all. I've had crawls put out. I've had callbacks, reverse 911s. I've used those. Um, I've never used a siren yet, but I have notified the EMA to put out everything that they have control over to either shelter people in place or notify them that we might be evacuating them. So yeah, there's a broad amount of things, but you have to get involved with your community. Go to your local area planning committee, emergency planning committees, and get involved in what they do. They are the ones that drive most of this stuff. They're all public meetings. These people are appointed, so they answer to you, and they have to answer your questions. So, attend a couple of the local emergency planning committee meetings. It's important. It's important who they put on those too, and we'll cover that before we hit the end because some of the people they put on them should not be on them. So get involved.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for putting that in the chat. So I was muting because there were some cars going by. So thank you for letting me know you couldn't hear me. So I've been to those local emergency planning committee meetings, and they usually happen in the state of Pennsylvania. It's once a quarter. And you can go onto the county website and look to see when the meeting's going to happen. And Jenny says our research via public records request shows that there has been an Ohio oil and gas related incident nearly every day. Radioactive brine spills, fires, and explosions, and more. And so that really ties in nicely to this slide that we have here. What is Austin Masters, and what is the role response did they have in this incident in particular? Do you want to talk a little bit about Austin Masters, Sil?
This is a very sad situation, and they originally tried to locate in Youngstown, and my chief and I went there, and basically they lied to us about a couple of things. I called them on it, and then the chief, before we left, said, "Well, do what you need to do, but we're going to be sending our inspectors at least twice a year to keep an eye on what you're doing here." And at that point, they said, we don't think that we're getting enough business here in this district. We're going to move south. So unfortunately, they moved south down to Martins Ferry. And they proceeded to do exactly what we thought they were going to do. Now, mind you, um, citizen or concerned Ohio River residents corps, led by what's her name? Name escapes me right now. Who's
Leah
leading it?
Harper? Is that who you're
Leah, no,
asking? Yeah.
not Leah. Um,
Bev Reed.
Bev Reed. She got a hold of a bunch of us. She got a hold of myself. She got a hold of Dr. Julie Weatherington Rice. She got a hold of a few other people to come down, and we actually talked to the legislature and said, "Hey, look, you have no idea what you're getting into." And I stressed industrial hygiene because that was the thing that scared them the most. Well, this is they said they're going to do this, they're going to do that. I said, "Have you watched them?" And I even offered my help. Well, they turned us down. A couple of years later, they discovered that they had this mess. There was no industrial hygiene. These people were marching around inside this plant, contaminating themselves up one side and down the other. And all this stuff had, contained radium 226, radium 228, and all the other VOC chemicals and the BETXs that were involved. They're bringing this stuff home to their families. In fact, one of our props that we use is one of the boots from the guys that works there. Now, when you do rad checks, level of concerns are twice background radiation. If you're picking something that's twice background radiation, you got a problem. Twice background radiation in Ohio would be anywhere between 30 to 60, what they would call counts per minute. This guy's shoes putting off 380 counts per minute. So we're way above this. We're into the realm of dangerously contaminated. And if you looked at, they were talking, well, we had, again, we go back to the emergency response plans. Well, we have emergency response plans in case there's flooding of the Ohio River because we're so close to the Ohio River. Well, as you can see, they didn't. And unfortunately for the people of Martins Ferry, this plant is located within a few thousand feet of their aquifers. So as Julie Weatherington Rice said, this is not a matter of if they're going to be contaminated. It's a matter of when.
Yeah.
And with the flooding and all this other stuff, I mean, if you looked at pictures inside, it was just terrible. So bad that the pro-fracking Ohio State Legislature had the Attorney General close them down. Now, it's got to be bad when these drill baby drill people are closing down the people that are cleaning up the waste.
Yeah.
So our biggest worry now is where are they going to relocate? Because the waste don't stop. It's got to go somewhere.
Right.
It's an LLC. They'll just file for bankruptcy, and Austin Masters will open up tomorrow as Masters Austin somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we've got to keep vigilance. And this is really a situation where, again, nobody listened. One of the things that I always say is at the beginning of every disaster movie is somebody saying, "Hey, this could happen. And everyone's saying, never, 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 never. And here's a situation where what we said was going to happen did.
Yeah.
And fortunately, in Youngstown, we kind of recognized what was going to happen. Unfortunately for Martins Ferry, they weren't so up on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we actually have, and just so people know, the oil and gas waste that was at this Austin Masters plant comes from not just oil and gas drilling in Ohio, but also Pennsylvania. And I also think West Virginia. I know that some of the drillers around here were sending their waste to this facility because you can actually in Pennsylvania you can go online and you can actually see from a well pad where the waste has gone. So I encourage everyone to go onto the PADEP oil and gas reporting site. They have interactive reports and you can actually see where the waste is going from a well pad in your community and see where it's going. And I guarantee in there somewhere it's going to say Austin Masters. And yeah, it's really bad to think about the radioactivity. And I didn't know. I think you told me this, Sil, when you were here earlier this month. I didn't know that the boots that were porous. Maybe it was Justin that said this. So the radiation actually stays in the boot. It's never gonna leave it because the heels are porous. So yeah, it just doesn't ever go away.
Lead is a big absorber. Um,
Yeah.
that's why in the fire service, everyone's proud of their leather Carnes helmets. And everyone said, "Hey, Sil, how come you never bought a leather Carnes helmet?" I said, "Because when we have a hazmat spill, I don't want somebody throwing my $400 leather Carnes helmet in a garbage can that I'll never see again, because the leather will absorb all the chemicals, and you're not going to decontaminate them. It's impossible." So
Yeah.
yes, the leather, even though the guy washed his boots on a regular basis, I don't even want to know where the hell he washed them at. But even though he washed them on a regular basis, the rad's still stuck in there because it absorbed into the leather. So,
Yeah.
and
And
if you look at the picture, these guys are spraying stuff down. They have no masks on. They're inhaling this stuff. They're putting it in their mouth. It's just these people were ingesting basic poisons. So,
yeah. Yeah. We have another message in the chat. So, how will campers, hunters, boaters in our Ohio parks get notified and evacuated? I wonder. That's a great question.
it's a question to which I really don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Uh, the park police sort of kind of know where campers are, but if they're being transient and walking the paths, if one of these wonderful injection wells have a problem, they can go to the campsite where they've said they've took out their permit to sit, but they might not be there. They might be somewhere on the paths. So
Yeah.
that's something that ODNR is going to have to answer to. And I know when I testified in front of them, they didn't have that answer.
Right. Yeah. All right. And I think somebody was asking for a link, and I think that they were asking for the link about for the reports. So I'm going to go ahead and I just actually Googled PADEP oil and gas reports. And this is the report for, I'm going to put the link in the chat. This is a report. This is the main page for DEP's interactive reports. And so if you scroll down to under interactive reports, if you scroll down to the waste, let me see. The waste reports are here. There's a lot of really good reports here. There's compliance reports, there's inspection reports, waste reports. Yeah, so waste reports is kind of the middle of the report list. So you can check it out. And here, let me actually click on it. Sometimes when I click on it, now I will say this gives a lot of information. I did a training actually that should still be on our YouTube. I did a training on how to extract the information from these reports in a way that's usable. Because and if you've ever used like Excel, so what this does is this website will download it into an Excel or a spreadsheet. And so it will actually then, it's a ton of information. And so if you're familiar with pivot tables, I use pivot tables to collate the information in a way that's usable. So definitely, I highly suggest that. If you are interested in the training, you could email me. I'm happy to do another training, give another training for folks. That's one of the things that we do at Protect PT, try to educate other folks. I also want to mention that for CORE, and for some other folks in Ohio, we're also the fiscal sponsor for some of those folks in those small organizations, helping helping to fund some of the work that they do. So it's really good. We're all working together here, and that's actually also part of our oil and gas waste collab we have there. So just wanted to mention those things. And so if we go to the next slide, actually, um, and I don't know, did we talk about how it says I'm part of the Save Ohio Parks and I created an animated short film called Stand Up for Them. Feel free to share it. Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you so much, Jenny. If you want to go ahead and put the link to that in the chat, that would be awesome. Sil, tell us a little bit about this slide right here.
Well, this is where I was testifying just before I testified in front of the state of Ohio's state legislature, basically on the issues that were on Draculic, or not Draculic, the Stat Oil explosion and well burning. And one of the things that I found out very quickly is most of these people are voting for stuff that they don't even understand. While I was testifying, and if you can actually look at my testimony,
Mm-hmm.
I can get a link to you and you can put it out to the people.
Yep.
There's a gentleman from Toledo that actually asked me a question, and he goes, "So, am I to understand that unlike in Toledo, where businesses have to have material safety data sheets, or SDSs as they're called now, the oil industry isn't required?" Now, this man voted for these bills, and he had no idea what was
Mm-hmm.
in them.
Yep.
So this is what you're dealing with on a state and probably federal level, because I fear what's going on is that the individual political parties just say, here, vote for this, vote for this, vote for this, and most people don't read what's in them.
Yeah,
You shouldn't be asking me that question if you actually read your legislation that you voted for, because it's in there.
that's
And
right.
it's it's just crazy. And when I went and I testified in front of the PA grand jury, I think it was the 43rd or 48th,
43rd.
uh,
Yep, you're right. The first 43rd.
uh, 43rd grand jury, these are things that came up continuously. And you know, my recommendations were, pull that veil of secrecy off. Let
Mm-hmm.
at least first responders know. Uh,
Yeah,
get the information to the people. Get full chemical disclosure. Make sure that you're not allowed to put these wells too close to people. And there's a number of recommendations. I think two or three of them ended up in the final report. But it is what it is. The oil and gas industry has a lot of money, and like Santa Claus, they spread it liberally on all sides of the aisles. So
yeah, yeah, for sure. And this is actually these are some pictures from East Palestine, the train derailment. Yeah, I think the picture from space is quite impressive and not in a good way. You can see the cloud of the contaminants, and people there are still dealing with contamination. Um, from this disaster, people still are dealing with these chemicals in their home. Can you tell us maybe just a couple like key takeaways, because we are getting short on time, so I want to make sure we can get through the rest of the material. But what are some of the key takeaways that you noticed with this, with the response to this issue here in East Palestine? I know earlier you mentioned that they were basically putting contaminated soil underneath the tracks. They were hiding it, correct?
well, what happened was, in conversations that I had with the news media, with other hazmat people that were relieved off the scene, uh, Norfolk Southern basically took over command.
Mm-hmm.
their incident commander allowed them to, and that's the problem. Um, and he allowed them to do whatever they wanted. And I mean, in the first picture, you can see when they detonated it. When I was at the news, I was asked by Channel 27 News in Youngstown to color comment on what they were doing. When I got there, the newsman was. I asked him, "What's the weather like?" And he says, "Well, this is this. The wind's coming out. It was a nor'easter wind." And he said, "Oh, and you got about a 3,000-foot inversion." And I said, "Oh shit, that's not good." And they said, "Why is that?" Because what's going to happen is that's going to go up to 3,000 feet and then stratify in a 360-degree pattern all around. And that's what you see in the first and the last pictures.
Mhm.
That's what it did.
Yeah.
It didn't go up and make a nice little mushroom cloud. It just went up and then stratified out. Um, and that was all approved by the fire chief. Um, I ended up uh, being very vocal against it. And at a meeting down in East Palestine, a couple of guys came up and said, "Hey, we represent a law firm that is going to file a class action lawsuit. We want you involved in this lawsuit." So for a year and a half, I advised, I wrote reports, I looked at documentation, I digested stuff, went with them. The second picture is actually one of the holes that the explosives poked to let the product out. The second picture is all the cars that were sitting there that Norfolk Southern was trying to quickly get rid of. And the company that I worked for actually filed an injunction to keep those cars there so that they could look at them. There was a lot of missteps. And in the end, uh, you know, they basically had a uninformed individual make decisions that benefited them.
Yeah.
And when I tell you get involved, I mean get involved because the governor of the state of Ohio took the fire chief from East Palestine, who, mind you, to CBS News said he wouldn't have done anything different knowing the final outcome. He said this publicly in a news thing. The governor of the state of Ohio put him on the state emergency planning committee. This is one of the guys that are planning for the next emergency that you see there.
Wow.
And in my opinion, he lacked any credentials whatsoever to make the decision. I mean, first of all, he had a hazmat, he had a fire, and he had a derailment. All three of them were bad, but
Yeah.
he did not utilize his research. He never did any pre-planning. There was, command and control issues up and down the chain. Now this guy's sitting in the state of Ohio and Columbus making decisions for the next great emergency. I mean,
Wow.
I love to see what his emergency response plan is to that. Just blow it up. Go ahead. I mean, come
Wow.
on, people. And this is where I say get involved, because these people that we elect to office, these people that make these decisions, we put them there. We allow them to be there.
Yeah, yeah. And I put the link that's in here to this video for folks to look at later. But it talks about, this wastewater well overflow. So the link is in the chat for this slide. And I think we talked about what so did I don't know if we talked about what are the signs of an industrial emergency and how people could respond. I think we talked a little bit about how some people respond, how first responders respond, but um, yeah, can you talk any more about this in the couple minutes that we have left?
Unfortunately, a lot of times it isn't the wellhead operators or it isn't the injection well operators that call in the emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point was a release that happened in another town next to Youngstown. And we didn't know that we were having a problem until the hospital, 2.5 miles away, started smelling gas. And we're wondering, do they have a gas leak? Do we got to evacuate this huge hospital, St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Youngstown, over 1,000 beds in the facility, not to mention people in the ER. So we started backtracking, and we found out, we traced it back to a well that was being drilled in Girard. They had a kick, and they released, we don't know how much and to what level that it was released or what explosiveness it had, product that spread over a 2.5 mile area. Again, um, inversions played into this because it's stratified at about 600 or 700 feet. But I mean, they're not going to be necessarily the first people that call you. It's going to be, hey, I smell gas, and we kick a fire truck out, and they said, yeah, we smell it too. It's all over the place, and that's how it rolls. Um, at the picture you're looking at here, the Stat oil well fire, they didn't call emergency first responders until it was way, way, way too late.
Wow.
And oftentimes the industry is not going to be the first one to say, "Hey, we have a problem," because they're going to say, "Oh, we have our emergency response plans, and they work." Well, you're looking at a picture of a plant or a wellhead that had an emergency response plan, and it looks like it didn't work to me. And that
Yeah.
seems to be common. It seems to be the common thread with all of these. When you do the after action reports, or what we call them AARs, and you look at these after action reports, every one of these people were approved by PADEP, ODNR, whichever
Mhm.
facility. And they had to have checked all those boxes and said they had that stuff. But lo and behold, when the time came time for the rubber to meet the road, it wasn't there.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what are the number one things that you should tell your local first responders or fire department? What would you tell a local fire department dealing with this for the first time?
Pre-plan, pre-plan, pre-plan. Do not take, we don't have that information. Push, through your local EMA to get information that you need.
Hmm.
Plan, 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 plan. That's all I can tell you. Plan, because if you don't plan, you're not prepared, and if you're
Yeah,
not prepared, you're going to end up, you know, with more problems than you need. And it's even more so, and it's a problem with rural fire departments because they're volunteer. It's hard for those guys to train because who can show up for training one day? Who's got a second job they got to go to? Kids playing baseball, kids are playing soccer, kids are playing this that. It's not easy like it is in my department where I say, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to train. We're going to train on this, and if you miss it, next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to train.
yeah,
It's not
yeah,
that easy for them, but you have to train for these things. You have to be prepared. Even if they're not going to give you the emergency, you have to know what you're dealing with and have some kind of plan, you know, to what you're going to do when these people call.
yeah. And it sounds like make sure that your local officials know exactly what's going on at the pad because they're making decisions that could impact local first responders without actually talking to the local first responders that are going to have to deal with it in the end. And
I mean,
that seems like a big problem to me.
we're dealing with one right now with a hearing that we're going to have on the 11th. There is no emergency response plan. There is no buy-in from the fire departments. They're
Yep.
talking about putting a considerable piece of equipment located close to homes, and how are we going to handle the problem? Uh, we don't have any ERPs for that.
Yeah, and Sill's talking about he is going to be testifying at our hearing next month for the compressor station that they're trying to put in our community. If you're local, please show up for that hearing. It's important. It's the second Thursday of the month every month. So I think it's July 11th is when that's going to happen. And really quickly, last minute question because we're over time here. But what equipment should local first responders have on hand to properly respond to an oil and gas incident, a facility incident?
They should have plenty of booms, pads. They should have they should be working together with the hazmat teams that are in the area or whatever facilities PADEP can get there. And they should, the first thing to do is in the fire service. I used to tend to overreact because for me, if I got the entire department coming to a fire that I think is big and I realize it's not that big, I can call these people off.
Yeah.
When I realize that I need them, I'm wasting time. So, get with your PADEPs, get with your hazmat teams, make sure that you have enough equipment there to stem the flow of anything for a period of time until these individuals can get there. Protect yourselves, demand that they include you in their plans, demand that you get the information. I think now Pennsylvania has a law that says first responders should be getting this information. Demand it.
Hmm.
Demand that you get what you need to take care of the people because they don't care. The only thing they care about is getting the oil out of the ground and making money. And if
That's
they're going to do it, they're going to do it. They're going to go through you, over you, under you, and around you to do it. You got to protect it. You got to protect your first responders so they can protect you. Make noise.
That's right. And I think a good way to do that that we mentioned earlier is to go to the local emergency planning committee. So go to your the website of your county and look to see when the next LEPC meeting is. So I want to thank you for talking to us today, talking to the folks that are on the Lunch and Learn, and thank you for all the work that you've done in the community to help people, and thank you for coming again to our community to testify next month at that hearing, because it's really, really important. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. If you would like to take our survey, please do. We want to know what you thought of this Lunch and Learn, as well as upcoming Lunch and Learns content that you're interested in us bringing to you. And then if you wouldn't mind, just really quick, Natalie, go to the next slide. Thank you to my staff who's on the background doing the tech. And next month, we're going to meet our interns that have been working with us all summer. That's going to be July 30th at 12 p.m. And we're going to stream that live on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to be talking to all of our awesome interns. Thank you so much, Sal and Sil, and thank you to our audience for all the wonderful questions. Really great questions today.
If you're in Ohio and you're looking for a grassroots organization, Buckeye Environmental will help you. As you can see, we work with Protect PT and a lot of other, we cross members over and we assist each other. So if you're in Ohio and you're looking for help, try there.
Yep.
Buckeye
Awesome.
Environmental.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thanks, Sil. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.